Hello fellow Whovians, it's Time Lord Myth here. Are you ready for your next adventure in time and space? Fantastic! Then let's set the coordinates and get started. Hello fellow Whovians. Well, today our very first video to go into a playlist will be a story that not only introduced William Hartnell as the Doctor, but started off the legend that would become Doctor Who. And I'm talking about An Unearthly Child. Now, rather than me give you a boring description of the plot and what happens, I'll just give you the relevant points, okay? Because it's not going to do my viewing figures any good doing that. And also, I don't want to spoil it for you. If you're a fan that hasn't actually seen An Unearthly Child, whether you're a new Whovian to the classic series, or it's just something you haven't seen yourself, I don't want to spoil it for you because I want you to get as much out of it as you can, okay? Now, the series was basically co-created by Sydney Newman, who was the head of drama at BBC. And at the time, the BBC were looking for a replacement program and a lead-in program to one of their other shows. And forgive me because I can't remember what that actually was. But they decided they wanted something a bit different. They noticed there'd been success on television before with science fiction. You had the Quatermass experiment, and then there were Pathfinders to Venus, and a few others. So they wanted something along those lines, but Sydney Newman insisted that it needed to be educational, and he insisted that there was going to be no BEMs. Okay, see what that means down there. So it was basically, the outline was there. Now the story, of course, we all know, they decided to make a mysterious traveller through time and space who was a few hundred years old, and it's that was the basic bones of Doctor Who at that stage. Now the beginning of the story is basically told through the perspective of Ian and Barbara, school teachers at Coal Hill School, and they're both in their own way concerned about a student, Susan Foreman, because she's brilliant at some things and she's totally naive at others. And we get this wonderful flashback scenes where Ian, her science teacher, gives her a problem to solve, and she says, but I can't do it. You can't solve this problem without the fourth dimension. And he says, what fourth dimension? And she says, well, you've got height, width, breadth, but you need time as well. And he thinks that's really weird. And also that she's quite bored with some of the experiments that they're doing. She finds it, so elementary. And yet it's at a level that is basically compatible for a student her age, or so they think. And Barbara also indicates that she's really concerned that the girl seems to have some sort of in-depth knowledge of certain parts of history, and in other parts she seems quite naive. For example, they talk about English coins, and this is pre-decimal, pound, shilling and pence, and all the students laugh at Susan because she mentions dollars and cents, and Barbara says, now Susan, don't be ridiculous, America has a decimal currency, you know quite well that we don't. And Susan says, oh, that's right, it hasn't happened yet. So we get this really great sense of mystery of who is this girl. She's brilliant, but she's also sort of really quite naive. Susan explains to the teachers that she lives with her grandfather who doesn't like visitors, so it's not possible, and he's quite frail, and he can't come to the school to discuss her scholastic achievements or otherwise. So they decide to follow her home one day, and they discover that she appears to live in a junkyard. And on the doors is written, "I am Foreman, scrap merchant." Now, it only just struck me, and I'm literally saying literally before I did this video, that it almost sounds like "I am Foreman." And I'm just wondering whether they knew this, the production team, when they actually came across all the details and so forth, whether that was a subtle hint that they were giving us, that that's a clue that the doctor perhaps picked up, that it was a sign that he should name his granddaughter Foreman for obviously purposes of enrolling her at school and so forth. So they discreetly follow her in, and they're really shocked to see her go into a police box. But then the doctor comes out, and he looks around and goes back in, and this is the pivotal moment where they confront the doctor, who says, no, there's no girl in here. You must be mistaken, young man. And we get to see how William Hartnell will develop the character initially towards Ian and Barbara, because he's very hostile, he's very aloof, he doesn't trust them, they obviously know something's going on. And then Susan comes out, and to cut a long story short, they burst in, and we, as the television audience, get our first look at the interior of the TARDIS. Now, can you imagine, back in 1963, I mean, when I was watching Doctor Who, when I can remember it from the Troughton era, the TARDIS interior always fascinated me. And I'd see them walk in and out, and I'd wonder, why is it a thin door on the outside, but it's a really thick door inside? Stuff like that, okay? One of the things that was actually dropped from the original pilot to the finished version was that Susan mentions that her and the Doctor are from the 49th century. And Verity Lambert, the producer, said, no, we'll get rid of that because it's too constricting. It locks us in. And also, too, it takes away some of the mystery. And so it was just, we're just from another time, another planet. And Ian and Barbara go, yeah, right, okay. And they're convinced that this old man has somehow, like a Svengali, has, sort of gotten Susan to believe all this delusions. And of course, we know it's not a delusion, because we're the audience. We've got the inside knowledge. And the Doctor shows how he will do anything to protect his granddaughter and, of course, himself. And he says what to do. And Susan says, oh, please, grandfather, let them go. They won't speak. And I know these humans. You don't. They won't say anything. And even if they do, who's going to believe them? But the Doctor won't have a bar of it. And they actually get whisked away in the TARDIS. And that's when we get a view of where the TARDIS lands. That's the cliffhanger. One major difference between the pilot and a few in the series that would change later on was that each episode had its own story title, whereas now, of course, well, later on, it was just basically the story title, then episode 1, episode 2, so forth. But what a brilliant way the writer, who was Anthony Coburn, by the way, came up with to demonstrate the power of a time machine. If you're going from present-day Britain way back into prehistory to the time of the cavemen. So that was really brilliant. But it wasn't really wonderful for the actors involved, because I shouldn't laugh, the costume department had gotten all these skins and furs and so forth, but apparently they were full of bugs and all the actors kept getting eaten. And that's on top of having to act under these blazing hot studio lights. So it wasn't terribly comfortable for all involved. Doctor Who. An Unearthly Child is important for a number of reasons, because one of the first ones is we get a reference to the chameleon circuit. Well, not the circuit actually itself, but when the Doctor steps out onto this rocky, sandy, barren landscape and looks up and see that the TARDIS is still a police box, and he said, strange, very strange, it should have changed. Why didn't it change? So we know that there's something dinky wrong with the TARDIS. But also too, we get to see the dark side of the Doctor when he is going to, without any qualms, smash someone's head in with a rock. Now that was pretty heavy going. I mean, even back in 1963, of course it didn't happen. But as his character progresses, we get to see how he evolves and how his character is like a professor, a scientist, because he says things later on to Ian Chesterton. Well, come, my boy, you must have some basic understanding of science. Well, yes, but of course it's beyond him. So there's an air of superiority about the Doctor. But this is later on when he starts trusting Ian and Barbara a lot more. Now, the whole dynamics of the TARDIS crew fit in perfectly with what they were trying to achieve in terms of audience. Carol Ann Ford, who played Susan, was meant to be the bridge so that the children watching the show would have someone relatable and someone they could relate to. Now, the interesting fact is that Carol Ann Ford was 22 when she played a high school student, but she's so gorgeous and she's got this lovely elfin face and gorgeous little figure that she'd get away with it. Barbara, she was, well, even though she was a teacher herself and she was quite an independent woman for 1963, she became very much a mother figure to Susan later on. And she was always the voice of reason. But that wasn't to say that she was quiet or passive. She'd stand up and she'd say to the Doctor, how dare you? You know, you kidnapped us. You know, basically kidnapped us. And all we've done is try to help you. And Ian, of course, was the action figure. Because he's obviously there when there was physical things that needed doing that were obviously beyond William Hartnell. He was there to jump in, whether it was a fight or whatever. So the dynamics were very important and they worked extremely well. Now, if you haven't seen it, Dark Realmers, I encourage you to get your own copy of An Unearthly Child. I hope you've enjoyed the trivia and the facts I've given you today. But this is a great DVD. Not only is it your first introduction to Doctor Who, but there's also some great commentary on there from Carol Ann Ford, the producer Verity Lambert, and the director Waris Hussein. And you can also see the 35-minute studio pilot that ended up being tweaked and changed very subtly, but you'll pick up on it. And it's a great introduction to something that was going to become a phenomenon. And despite what Sidney Newman said about no goddamn, BEMs, because he was Canadian, bug-eyed monsters, that was all going to change. And that was in the next story, The Dead Planet, which of course introduced the world to the Daleks, and Doctor Who would never be the same, but they almost didn't happen. But that's a story for another day. So there you go, Whovians. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, let me know what you thought in the comments. Have you seen An Unearthly Child? What did you think of it? What are some of the things you've picked up on that perhaps I didn't get around to mentioning today, okay? And I'd really appreciate it if you give us a like. I mean, if you did genuinely like it, don't just do it because I have asked you to. Okay, and if you want to keep up with some more great Whovian trivia, facts, and a look back through time itself, then don't forget to subscribe to us, okay? So that's it from me, Time Lord Myth, and I'll see you again somewhere in time and space. Bye for now, Whovian.